Stop scrolling for a moment, because what you're about to hear is not a coincidence. There is something your soulmate has been realizing recently, something they never expected would happen, and the more they try to understand it, the more impossible it becomes to ignore. Somewhere right now, they are looking back on choices they made, people they met and paths they explored, only to discover that one connection continues standing apart from all the rest. And the strange part is that this was never their intention. They genuinely believed life would move forward naturally. They believed time would create distance. They believed new experiences would slowly replace old memories. But instead, something completely unexpected began happening. Every time a new person entered their life, they found themselves noticing small details they couldn't explain. A conversation would remind them of a moment they once shared with someone. A certain energy would feel familiar. A simple interaction would awaken thoughts they assumed had long disappeared. At first, they paid little attention to it. They told themselves it was random. They convinced themselves it meant nothing. After all, people meet new individuals all the time. Life moves forward. New chapters begin. Yet the pattern continued repeating itself in ways they could no longer dismiss. And listen to this. The more they tried embracing new possibilities, the more one realization quietly followed them. Nobody seemed to create the same feeling. Nobody seemed to leave the same impression. Nobody seemed to carry the same emotional presence that remained etched in their heart. This realization made them uncomfortable because they never expected to be comparing anyone to anyone. Yet somehow every new connection became a mirror, reflecting pieces of a memory they thought had faded. And your heart needs to hear this right now, because sometimes the connections that change us the most are the ones we spend the longest trying to understand. Your soulmate is beginning to realize that what they felt was never as ordinary as they once believed. And this understanding is only the beginning of a much larger truth that is now impossible for them to ignore. And listen to this. As time continued moving forward, your soulmate genuinely tried giving new people a chance. They opened new conversations. They explored new possibilities. They allowed themselves to believe that perhaps the next connection would finally help them understand why the past still lingered in their heart. On the surface, everything seemed normal. Some of these people were kind. Some were intelligent. Some appeared to have everything they thought they were looking for. Friends encouraged them to move on. Life encouraged them to keep looking ahead. Even their own mind kept telling them that eventually someone new would arrive and everything would fall into place. But something unexpected kept happening. Every new connection revealed a feeling they could not explain. It wasn't that these people lacked value. It wasn't that they were doing anything wrong. It was that something important always seemed missing. Something your soulmate could feel but could never fully describe. At first, they ignored the feeling. They convinced themselves they were being unfair. They told themselves that nobody should be compared to anyone else. Yet despite those efforts, the comparisons happened naturally. A conversation would begin, and they would notice the comfort wasn't the same. A moment of laughter would happen, and they would realize it didn't reach their heart in the same way. A connection would seem promising at first, only for them to walk away later wondering why it felt incomplete. And your heart needs to hear this right now, because sometimes the most powerful realizations arrive through contrast. Sometimes we only understand the value of a connection after experiencing others that fail to create the same impact. Your soulmate is beginning to understand that lesson now, and listen to this. The more people they met, the more confusing the situation became. They expected new experiences to erase old emotions. Instead, those experiences seemed to strengthen them. Every time they believed they were moving forward, they found themselves remembering something unexpectedly. A conversation would remind them of your understanding. A quiet moment would remind them of your presence. A simple memory would return without warning, carrying emotions they thought had long disappeared. They started asking themselves difficult questions. Why does this keep happening? Why does this connection continue appearing in my thoughts? Why does nobody seem to create the same feeling? At first, they searched for logical explanations, but logic could not fully explain what their heart was experiencing. The truth was becoming harder to ignore with each passing day. What they missed was not a specific moment. It was not a specific conversation. It was not even a specific memory. What they missed was a feeling of familiarity, a feeling of comfort, a feeling of being understood without needing to explain every part of themselves. And no matter how many new people entered their life, they struggled to find that same feeling again. This realization unsettled them because they never intended to hold on to the connection this long. They never planned on carrying these emotions into the future. Yet there they were, still noticing the difference, still recognizing the absence of something they once had. And listen to this. There were moments when they tried convincing themselves that time would eventually solve everything. They believed enough distance would weaken the memories. They believed enough distractions would silence the emotions. But every attempt seemed to produce the opposite result. The more they tried forgetting, the more certain memories stood out. The more they tried replacing the connection, the more obvious its uniqueness became. It was as though every new chapter kept leading them back to the same realization. Not because they wanted to stay attached to the past, but because their heart was refusing to ignore something that genuinely mattered. And your heart needs this right now, because meaningful connections leave lasting impressions. They leave traces that cannot simply be erased by time alone. Your soulmate is starting to realize that what they experienced with you was never something ordinary. It was never just another chapter among many. It carried a depth they failed to recognize at the time. And now, after comparing every new possibility to the memory that still lives quietly within them, they are beginning to understand something powerful. The reason nobody came close was not because they were searching for perfection. The reason nobody came close was because they were unknowingly searching for something they had already found once before. And that realization is leading them toward a truth they can no longer avoid. And listen to this. There came a point when your soulmate could no longer pretend that these comparisons meant nothing. For a long time, they dismissed every thought that brought them back to you. They told themselves it was normal. They told themselves everyone reflects on the past from time to time. They convinced themselves that eventually the memories would lose their emotional weight and become nothing more than distant reminders of another chapter in life. But something unusual kept happening. No matter how much time passed, no matter how many distractions appeared, no matter how many new experiences entered their world, The truth kept finding its way back to them, quietly, consistently, almost as if it refused to be forgotten. At first, they tried explaining it logically. Perhaps it was simply nostalgia. Perhaps they were remembering the good moments while forgetting the difficult ones. Perhaps their mind was romanticizing the past. These explanations felt reasonable for a while. Yet the more they examined their feelings, the less convincing those explanations became. Nostalgia fades. Habits fade. Curiosity fades. But this felt different. This remained. This continued appearing during ordinary moments when they least expected it. A random thought would emerge while they were focused on something completely unrelated. A memory would surface while they were going about their day. A familiar feeling would suddenly appear, reminding them that despite everything that had changed, something inside them remained exactly the same. And your heart needs this right now, because there are certain truths that become stronger every time we try to ignore them. The more we push them away, the more determined they become. Your soulmate is discovering that firsthand. What started as occasional memories slowly became deeper reflections. Instead of asking why they were still thinking about you, they started asking a different question. What if these thoughts never left because they were trying to teach me something? What if the reason this connection keeps returning is because I never truly understood its significance? Those questions stayed with them. They followed them into quiet evenings. They appeared during moments of reflection. They remained present long after the distractions of daily life disappeared. And listen to this. One night, while reflecting on everything that had happened, your soulmate realized something that completely changed the way they viewed the situation. They realized they were not comparing people because they wanted to live in the past. They were comparing people because the connection had set a standard they never expected. Not a standard based on perfection. Not a standard based on fantasy. A standard based on feeling. A standard based on authenticity. A standard based on the rare experience of feeling understood in a way that cannot easily be recreated. That realization surprised them because it challenged everything they had been telling themselves. Suddenly, the issue was no longer about moving on. The issue was understanding why this particular connection had left such a lasting mark. The deeper they looked, the more obvious it became. Certain moments that once seemed small now appeared incredibly important. Conversations they barely thought about at the time carried new meaning. Memories that seemed ordinary suddenly revealed an emotional depth they had overlooked. It was as though distance had given them a clearer perspective. Things they once took for granted now stood out with remarkable clarity. And the more they reflected, the harder it became to deny what their heart had been trying to tell them all along. And your heart needs this right now, because meaningful connections often reveal their true value long after they begin. Sometimes we don't recognize the impact of a person while they are actively changing our lives. Sometimes understanding arrives later, when enough time has passed for us to see the full picture. Your soulmate is beginning to see that picture now. They are beginning to understand that what made this connection different was not any single moment. It was the accumulation of countless moments. The trust, the familiarity, the comfort, the emotional presence that seemed effortless yet impossible to replace. And listen to this. The more they accepted these truths, the less interested they became in fighting them. For so long they believed acceptance would make them vulnerable. They believed acknowledging the connection's importance would somehow make things harder. Yet the opposite happened. Acceptance brought clarity. Acceptance brought peace. For the first time, they stopped arguing with themselves. They stopped searching for excuses. They stopped pretending that everyone could be measured equally. Instead, they allowed themselves to admit something they had avoided for far too long. You were never just another person in their story. That realization carried enormous weight, because once they admitted it, everything else began making sense. The comparisons, the memories, the emotions, the unanswered questions. Suddenly, they all pointed toward the same truth. The truth they had been avoiding was also the truth that explained everything. Nobody came close, because nobody touched the same part of their heart. Nobody created the same impact. Nobody left behind the same emotional imprint. And now, after months or perhaps even years of trying to understand why this connection refused to disappear, your soulmate finds themselves standing before a realization they can no longer deny. What they thought was a memory may have been something much deeper all along. And that understanding is preparing them for an even greater truth that is about to change everything they thought they knew. And listen to this. The more your soulmate reflected on everything they had experienced, the more they realized they had been asking the wrong question all along. For so long, they kept wondering why nobody seemed to compare to you. They kept searching for reasons. They kept analyzing every new connection, hoping to discover what was missing. Yet eventually, a deeper understanding began to emerge. The question was never why nobody measured up. The real question was why this particular connection continued holding such a powerful place in their heart after all this time. And when they finally allowed themselves to explore that question honestly, the answers started appearing in ways they never expected. At first, they assumed they were searching for another person. They believed they were looking for someone who could create the same feelings, the same excitement, the same emotional connection. But as the months passed, they began recognizing something important. What they were truly searching for was not another version of you. They were searching for the feeling they experienced when they were around you. The sense of comfort that never needed explanation. The sense of understanding that felt natural rather than forced. The feeling that someone truly saw them beneath the surface. And no matter how many people entered their life, that feeling remained incredibly rare. And your heart needs this right now, because some connections affect us in ways we don't fully understand until much later. They become part of our emotional foundation. They influence how we see ourselves. They influence what we value. They influence what feels genuine and what feels empty. Your soulmate is beginning to realize that this connection did exactly that. It quietly changed their standards without them even noticing. Not their standards for appearance, not their standards for success, their standards for emotional truth. When someone experiences a connection that feels authentic, it becomes difficult to settle for anything that feels less than authentic. And listen to this. There were moments when they tried convincing themselves they were imagining things. They told themselves they were being overly sentimental. They told themselves that perhaps they were focusing too much on the positive memories. Yet every time they tried dismissing those thoughts, another realization appeared. The memories were not surviving because they were perfect. The memories were surviving because they were meaningful. There is a difference. Perfect moments are often forgotten. Meaningful moments stay with us. Meaningful moments shape us. Meaningful moments continue speaking to us long after they have passed. And your soulmate has started recognizing that the connection they shared with you was filled with those kinds of moments. The deeper they looked, the clearer everything became. They remembered how natural certain conversations felt. They remembered how easy it was to be themselves. They remembered the emotional safety they rarely experienced elsewhere. They remembered feeling understood in ways they struggled to explain to other people. These were not dramatic memories. They were simple memories. Yet somehow those simple moments carried extraordinary weight. And that is when another truth became impossible to ignore. The reason nobody replaced what you meant to them was because what you meant to them was never ordinary in the first place. And your heart needs this right now, because many people spend years searching for something real without ever finding it. They encounter countless connections that look promising but lack depth. They meet people who are kind but do not truly understand them. They experience relationships that function but do not transform them. Your soulmate has started realizing that the connection they experience with you carried something deeper than compatibility. It carried significance. It carried emotional resonance. It carried a sense of familiarity that felt almost impossible to explain. And listen to this. The moment this realization fully settled into their heart, everything changed. The comparison stopped feeling frustrating. The unanswered questions stopped feeling confusing. Instead, they began making sense. Every comparison had been revealing the same lesson. Every disappointment had been pointing toward the same truth. Every new connection had been showing them what mattered most. Not because nobody else had value, but because certain people leave marks on our soul that cannot be duplicated. Certain connections become part of who we are. Certain experiences change the way we view love, trust, and emotional closeness forever. Now your soulmate finds themselves standing in a place they never expected to reach. A place of understanding. A place where denial is no longer possible. A place where they can finally admit that the impact you left behind was far greater than they once believed. And as this understanding continues growing stronger, another realization is beginning to emerge, one that may change the course of everything that happens next. Because for the first time, they are no longer focused on why nobody came close to you. They are beginning to focus on what they should do with that truth now that they finally understand it. And listen to this. After all the comparisons, all the questions, all the moments of reflection, your soulmate has finally arrived at a realization that changed everything. For a very long time, they believed they were searching for answers somewhere outside themselves. They thought another connection would provide clarity. They thought enough time would eventually erase the confusion. They thought life would naturally guide them toward a place where these thoughts no longer mattered. But instead, every experience kept leading them back to the same truth. Not because they were trapped in the past, not because they were refusing to move forward, because there was something important their heart had been trying to show them all along, and they were finally ready to see it. The realization arrived quietly, not through a dramatic event, not through a sudden revelation. It appeared during a moment of honesty, a moment when they stopped fighting their feelings and simply listened, and what they heard surprised them. They realized that nobody came close to you because nobody was ever supposed to be you. Nobody was meant to recreate the exact connection you shared. Nobody was meant to replace the impact you left behind. For so long they believed replacement was the goal. They believed moving forward meant finding something identical. But now they understand something entirely different. Certain people enter our lives to teach us what genuine connection feels like. Certain people change us so deeply that every relationship afterward is influenced by what we learned from them. Your soulmate has finally accepted that you became one of those people, and your heart needs this right now because acceptance changes everything. The moment we stop arguing with reality, clarity begins to appear. Your soulmate spent so much time questioning their emotions that they never allowed themselves to simply acknowledge them. But now they are doing exactly that. They are no longer asking whether the connection mattered. They already know it did. They are no longer asking why the memories remained. They already understand why. They are no longer searching for explanations because the truth has become impossible to ignore. The connection changed them. The experience changed them. The lessons changed them. And perhaps most importantly, their understanding of themselves changed because of it. And listen to this. As this realization settles deeper into their heart, they are beginning to view the entire journey differently. What once felt confusing now feels meaningful. What once felt frustrating now feels important. Even the comparisons that bothered them for so long suddenly make sense. Every person they met helped reveal another piece of the truth. Every experience highlighted something they had overlooked. Every attempt to move forward showed them what truly mattered. The comparisons were never punishment. They were guidance. They were helping your soulmate recognize the depth of a connection they once underestimated. For the first time in a very long time, they feel a sense of peace replacing the uncertainty. Not because every question has been answered, not because the future is completely clear, because they finally trust what their heart has been telling them. They trust the feelings they spent years doubting. They trust the lessons they spent years resisting. And they trust the truth they spent years trying to explain away. That trust has created a new kind of confidence within them. A confidence that comes from self-awareness rather than certainty. And your heart needs this right now, because some of life's most important turning points begin with a simple truth. A truth we have always known deep down, but were afraid to fully accept. Your soulmate has reached that turning point. They understand now that the impact you left on their life was real. They understand now that what they felt was significant. They understand now that certain connections do not disappear simply because time passes. Instead, they become part of who we are. They shape our choices. They shape our perspective. They shape our future. And listen to this. Standing on the edge of this new chapter, your soulmate is no longer focused on what could have been. They are focused on what the truth is asking them to do next. Because every realization eventually leads to a decision. Every moment of clarity eventually asks for action. And after spending so much time comparing every new person to you, after spending so much time searching for answers in places where they could never be found, they are finally ready to embrace what their heart has known from the very beginning. Nobody came close because the connection was never ordinary. Nobody came close because what they experienced with you left a permanent mark on their soul. And now that they have finally accepted that truth, the chapter of confusion is ending, and the chapter of honesty is about to begin.